Allahu Akbar. Allahu Akbar.
Islam was?
Islam.
There was I had a tough time thinking about what I wanted to talk about this evening. There's a lot that I want to say in the 1 hour or the 45 minutes to an hour time that I have on this rostrum. But I'm actually going to, for the sake of time in Sunday school, I'm going to finish out the chapter 45. After I do that, I'm going to talk about some basics of the Moorish Science Temple of America. It seems to me that the Sheik staff has bounced around a lot when it comes to certain principles and concepts of the Moorish Science Temple of America, and we can't leave that to just everyone should know what the movement is about. We have to at least make a statement on behalf of this holy and divine movement, on behalf of Temple number 19, of what this movement is about, what it consists of, what we do and what we don't do, why we do it and why we don't do it, etc., etc. Because we don't want there to be any confusion. We don't want there to be any misunderstanding regarding what we're looking to do, why we're looking to do it, why it's important that we have each and every one of you being a part of every part, even on the level of being a sympathizer, because sympathizers are just as much an integral part of this movement as the members, because we serve the interests of Asiatics living in America. We serve the interests of African Americans, people born of African indigenous descent. We are looking and striving rather to be that divine example, that representative. Islam was?
Islam.
So in order for us to do that, we have to have a clear concept of the work that we are called to do. So I ask that for those that may have heard this before to bear with me, and for those that have not, bear with me again. So as I mentioned before, I'm going to follow up with the measure that I had last Sunday. And I want to give honors real quick to Brother Kenny Allen over here for his words of wisdom. He told me after, Lord, the meeting last Sunday, he said not to burden the Moors with a long drawn-out explanation, but yet go through all 7 of the instructions and then explain the instructions that way. We honor our wisdom. I don't want to say elders because I don't know how you feel about elders. We honor the gray hairs of our masterminds. So what I will be doing is that we'll be going through chapter 45 briefly to finish that, because we have about 3 more chapters to go before we finish that, and I want to, and I want to keep the rhythm and the pace going regarding that chapter, or regarding the last 3 chapters. Chapter 45, Divine Origin of the Asiatic Nations, and I want y'all to keep in mind again, this is the perspective of the Moorish movement. If we were to truly and genuinely pay attention to the origins of man, all right, we will see that it's in this, what some would consider, or from European terms, the cradle of civilization. All right, so you have some of us that say that we started off in Uganda. You have some of us that say that we started off in Jerusalem, and we have some that say in Mecca, etc., etc. Even though they're at different points, they're still in the same region. All right, so if anything, we can all agree that there's something with that cradle of civilization from which man was formed. And we also have to remember too that we're not talking about the current disposition of the continents. We're talking about it as a whole. So when we say that man was originally birthed from Asia, the doctrine of the Moorish Science Temple of America covers all of that. You know, and it's not to deal with semantics, that's just our thought. Because in addition to providing and giving us the most sound information that we have, we also understand that there's different people that have different points of origin, and they have every right to exhibit that origin and to have faith in that origin and so on and so forth. That's why the prophet says that we are Asiatics. We come from that same region, that same area. So we're going to move forward. Instruction 1. The fallen sons and daughters of the Asiatic nation of North America need to learn to love instead of hate and know their higher self and their lower self. This is the uniting of the Holy Quran of Mecca for the teaching and instructing all Moorish Americans, etc. Instruction 2. The key of civilization was and is in the hands of the Asiatic nations, the Moorish, who were the ancient Moabites and the founders of the holy city of Mecca. Instruction 3. The Egyptians, who were the Hamathites and one of the direct descendants of Mizraim, the Arabians, the seed of Hagar, the Japanese and Chinese, the Hindus of India, the descendants of the ancient Canaanites, Hittites, and Moabites of the land of Canaan. Instruction 5. The Asiatic nations of North, South, and Central America, the Moorish Americans and Mexicans of North America, Brazilians, Argentinians, Chileans in South America, Colombians, Nicaraguans, and the natives of San Salvador in Central America, etc. All of these are Muslims. Instruction 7. The Turks are the true descendants of Hagar, who are the chief protectors of the Islamic creed of Mecca, beginning from Muhammad I, the founding of the uniting of Islam by the command of the great universal God, Allah. Islam was?
Islam.
All right, so again, we're going to be brief, I promise. Instruction 1. Should I have a note? Bear with me for a moment, family. When we talk about, again, for those that were taking notes on the last Sunday school, we talk about the concept of Asiatics, knowing that the concept of Asiatic comes from the ancient Kabbalistic teachings. All right? I'm going to talk about this some more in detail. The Moorish Science Temple of America does foster the Ibrahimic or the Abrahamic religion. So a lot of the doctrine and the references are going to be from the Abrahamic religion by way of Canaan. All right, the Moorish Science Temple of America, founded in 1913 AD in Newark, New Jersey, was known as the ancient Canaanite temple. It was in New Jersey. All right, and it is said by way of oral statements that Prophet Noble Drew Ali had started off, Islam says, had started off with another brother within the church. And all was well until the Prophet Noble Drew Ali started to promote and teach that we were from Canaan, that we were from the land of Canaan and Moab. And it is said, again, by way of the oral statements, that the assistant or the brother that was assisting the Prophet during that time was infuriated because he wanted to keep the ancient Canaanite temple more or less like an AME church. All right, and so it said that the Prophet was chased around with a knife and was driven out of New Jersey. He said it was said that he went to Detroit for a time, and then he found himself in Chicago, where he was able to fully establish the Moorish Science Temple of America. So once again, when the prophet understood that during this time period the Negro had succumbed to European Christianity. So he said the best way to trace themselves back is to start with the concept of Canaan. And when you look at the concept of Canaan and Moab, not just from a biblical perspective, but also from a scholarly perspective, you're able to undoubtedly trace yourself back. You're able to see that when you look at the majority of the West African kingdoms and regions, if you will, most of them, if not all, trace themselves back to Mizraim by the oral statements, by the griot. And then when you look at where Egypt or Mizraim trace themselves back, they trace themselves back to the Twa, down in this area. All right? Then, if you go even further, you have a group of African Hebrew Israelites from that region that trace themselves back, the same region as the Twa, to keep that in perspective, that trace themselves back to Canaan. All right? So, again, please take these notes down, fact check me. But this is where we all start, in that particular region. All right? And then what I explained to you before, we talked about the concepts of the higher self and lower self, so there's no need for me to go any further with that. Going into instruction 2, the Moors, who are the descendants of the ancient Moabites and the founders of the holy city of Mecca. All right? So look up Copius. All right? Copius had a piece of literature that, and I'll give you the more in-depth details during Sunday school. Had a document. It was Copius had a assistant who was helping to chronicle Copius when he went to North Africa. And it is said, according to the Passean text of the Bible, that Joshua ran out the Moabites. Correct? Right. All right. It is stated in the records of Copius and his assistant that in North Africa, close to Marrakesh, or as we know today as Morocco, there once stood two white pillars, and it stated in those two white pillars, here are the Moabites who were driven out by Joshua the robber. We also have to remember that, once again, Judaism, Christianity, Al-Islam, it starts off with Canaanite Ugaritic teachings. You want to doubt me? Give me a name of an angel. Gabriel. Raphael. Michael. You notice the pattern here? It all ends with ill. It all starts with ill. What is the name? The prophet tells us that we are to annex our names with El and Bey. What does El mean? What does Bey mean? We'll talk about that momentarily. But it all starts with Canaan. It all branches out. Allah is a derivative of the term Il. Elohim is a derivative of the term Il. So when we talk about the Elohim treading across the water, etc., etc., this is what the prophet is referencing to. All right? We're talking about the collective. Going back to the concept of the Moabites, when you trace, it goes back to Lot and Abraham. Lot and Abraham, they separated ways. They say Lot went one way, Abraham went the other way. He went towards Moab and Canaan. And as I told you all before, it is said in the Piscean text that Moab was the son of Lot that was created from his two daughters. Yeah. Now, this is the tricky part. And I know I don't mean no harm or disrespect, step on no toes, etc., etc. But we have to remember that in any doctrine, regardless if it's the Piscean text, the Bible, regardless if it's the Quran of Muhammad, regardless if it's the Vedas, the Avestas, the Analects, they were written for the sole purpose to perpetuate an ideal. All right? So in certain aspects, you can't take everything verbatim. All right? Some parts have to be allegory. All right? So when you talk about the creation of Moab and how it came about, not only should it be taken as allegory, but we also have to do our research and know that it was a time that came before that. It was a story that came before that. How many times do you think there was a flood? Do you think Noah was the only person that was blessed enough to have a flood, to have an ark? Those stories came from ancient Canaanite and Ugaritic myths. And they were used to perpetuate an ideal or a concept. It's stated that most of the Ashkenazi Jews, or the European Jews, if you will, and this is why, and I'm going to go into this a little bit later too, this is why nationality is important. Because we look at the Tanakh and the Torah and those teachings of Judaism, we look at it just as a form of spirituality. But you have the Ashkenazi, the European Jews, they look at it as their nationality. They look at it as their quality of character. So to be honest, you can talk to certain Jews and they say that to knock that Torah, that's just allegory for them. That is used to just keep a record of their history. Because we got to think about it. What's the story? The story is Abraham came from Tigris Euphrates. All right. He got initiated by Melchizedek, that was the king of what? Shalom. All right. And also it was consecrated by Il. Then, all of a sudden, the name changes and the concept changes. It goes from Il to Yahweh, and then you have this narrative to where all of the people in that region, all of a sudden they were worshiping wrong. Now, me personally, I advocate my ancient Canaanite Moabite forefathers. We can do no wrong. Eating bottom feeders and all. Eating shrimp, lobster, all of that stuff. But that's just me. But you see that there's a shift in the narration. There's a shift in the narrative. There was a shift in power. So then you start to have these books. And what's very interesting too is that we don't look at this from a Hellenistic standpoint. We don't look at it from the standpoint of the ancient Greeks. I digress. But when you get to the ancient Moabites, the ancient Quraysh, trace themselves back to Abraham by way of Ishmael, by way of Hagar. And so when we talk about them being the founders of the ancient city of Mecca, that's what they're referring to. They're talking about Abraham and Ishmael. All right? Building the Kaaba. The Kaaba, the cube, is the beginning of Mecca, is the beginning of paradise, is the beginning of the Eden. Eden means paradise. So your Eden can be anywhere. So moving forward, and I kind of covered this. The Egyptians, who were the Hamathites, the direct descendants of Mizraim, the Arabians, the seed of Hagar, the Japanese, and the Chinese. As I mentioned to you before, you know, when you have, let's do this. Got my brother over here, he's yawning. We have some interaction here. The Hamathites, or Ham. What's going on? Why was Ham cursed? How was Ham cursed?
He committed an incestual act of seeing his father's nakedness, quote unquote.
Right.
So to speak.
Right. Sis, you had something you want to say?
I rise giving all honor to Allah, all praise to Allah, the beneficent, the compassionate, the merciful, and to his prophet, noble Quran.
Islam.
So Ham was not cursed. It was actually Canaan that was cursed. It wasn't Ham that was cursed.
Right. Now, let's go over this story now. All right. So we have, as you said, sis.
Oh yeah, Canaan was.
Right. Both of you are right. Both of you are right. Both of you are right. But we want to think about, we want to look at this narrative here.
Right.
All right. And I'm oversimplifying this for a reason. So you have Noah and his sons. His father, he partakes in some alcoholic beverages. And supposedly he's naked. One of his sons see him naked. And then he goes and tells his other brothers that he sees his father naked. Because the other two sons decided to quote unquote turn their face to their father's nakedness, and Ham was the only one that saw his nakedness. His father cursed him. Let me repeat that again. His father cursed his son. Not Allah.
Right.
Now, I'm not going to ask y'all to raise your hands, but how many of y'all got cursed out by a drunken loved one? Do we take it seriously?
How many of us have been there?
Right. You know? And because I say this again because it is the narrative. There's undoubtedly wisdom and spiritual teachings in the narrative, but yet and still it is the narrative. And another thing we have to remember, it is still specific to that region. So why did those things happen? What was taking place during that time? How does that affect us today? When we get the teachings of Jesus, our Holy Quran of the Moorish Science Temple of America specifically deals with the teachings and the upbringings of Jesus. Why was that? Because again, that was specific to our situation. Again, we had to learn how to resurrect ourselves. Let me backtrack. First, we had to learn how to love ourselves. Then after we learned how to love ourselves, then we had to say, okay, we're at a dead state. Meaning we're at a state where there is no growth. How do we raise our thoughts? How do we raise our spirits? How do we resurrect ourselves? So the prophet, by way of Allah, said, then why don't we give him the prophet, the spirit of Allah, the Ruh Allah, that resurrected himself from a dead state. That way we can learn how to do these things. It says in the Moorish Holy Quran, when the will of man and the will of Allah are one, resurrection is a fact. So now it teaches us, now we have to submit our will to Allah. If you don't want to call him Allah, that's fine. If you have to submit your will to the Most High, you have to submit your will to the Divine. For those who don't think that they're connected to the Divine, why is it that you change colors when you get darker, rather, when you hit the sun? Why is it that you get cold and you freeze when it gets cold? Why is it that there's certain ingredients and certain minerals and herbs that when you take them, that come from the earth, that when you take them, it affects your body? Because we're connected. I can go a little bit deeper, but those are just think about that. How many of y'all have breathed some air today? I breathe that quite often. I need it to live. This is the divine. Look. There's a European by the name of Alan Watts, and he talks about being righteous. And he said that the gnosis of righteous is not enough. That's not being righteous. When you're able to take the breath and be thankful for that breath that you were taking, that's being righteous. How many of us have been thankful for taking your first breath this morning? How many of us are thankful for the most precious jewel that you have upon you, your eyes? That is what it means to be righteous, to understand genuinely the part of every part and being thankful for this thing. All right?
We also actually have in chapter 3, verse 2, that also confirms that no man lives unto himself, but every living thing is bound by cords to every other living thing.
Islam. Absolutely. So, when we talk about being the descendants of the Hamathites, we're coming from a particular region. And our prophet Noble Drew Ali also went so far as to say that the Hamathites was Moab itself was part of that region. All right. But what's interesting is that it also says the Japanese and the Chinese. That goes back to the Mongol concept. Now, for all intents and purposes, I know that we are not genuine fans of what's the guy's name? Starts with a B. Sheik, help me out. Blumenbach, thank you. I know we're not fans of Blumenbach. However, I think you even made the statement, Queen. Remember, there's two things. There's truth and falsehood. And so for everything that we consider to be completely falsehood, there is truth. I want you all to research. We're almost done, I promise. I want you to research Huxley's map of racial categories. Huxley's map of racial categories. Huxley's Huxleys map of racial categories. All right, and it deals with the geographical distribution of chief and races of mankind. And what you see, you have the top region, which would be they would say it's just Semitic. All right, and then this region right here is your Hamitic. Now, when we look at that, that's interesting because we say, okay, well, yeah, that also touches right here, northwest and southwestern shores of Africa. Talks about the eastern Sudan and the western Sudan. It also deals with Mecca, all right, where the prophet is, alayhi salam. But it also extends even further into India, the Hamitic stock. You have at one point, you had the Japanese that were tracing themselves from that region, from that China region, all right, until they got amalgamated. That's another story for another day.
Would that tie into the Kushite Empire?
Now, I'm at variance personally with the concept of the Kushite Empire. That's just me, because I want to do my own research, because you have certain parts of the research that says that the concept of Kush just means the south. The concept Kush just means the south. Now this is taking this with a grain of salt, but just FYI. So when you talk about the ancient Kushite area, you're actually talking about the southern areas, all right? But then you have this thing called Indus Kush, which is again, when we talk about Kush, you're talking about the southern India area. So you have that ideology. But then you have the other ideology when you look at writings from ages of antiquity that they vouch for Aksum, Sudan, etc., it extending even into the shores of India. So yes, that is a concept. Me personally, Rashid, not speaking for the Moorish Science Temple of America, I am at variance. However, when we talk about the concept of race, it does fall into that category. All right, y'all still with me?
Yes.
All right. So the Asiatics, nations of North, South, Central America, Moorish Americans, Mexicans, North Americans, Brazilians, Argentinians, Chileans in South America, Colombians, Nicaraguans, and the natives of San Salvador and Central America, all these are Muslims. Why is that? Nobody knows? Why is it that all of these areas, we didn't say all of them were Moors, because we get that confused. We said all of them are Muslims.
Well, they were all, because what we now know as Africa,
right,
when we come over here to South America is nothing but Western Africa.
Right.
And so when everything was one piece, there's no way that these people would not be Muslims.
Right. We also have the Moorish conquest, 711. We also have Mansa Musa. And what and Mansa Musa and his uncle and what he did. All right, it is written in one of the journals of Christopher Columbus that when he came over to Cuba, there was a masjid with a minaret on there. It was a building with a minaret that was very similar to the masjids or the mosques that they saw in Spain and in parts of Africa.
Hey, Sheik, what's a minaret?
Minaret. A minaret is the tall, lengthy portion of the masjid where the muezzin, the caller, calls out the adhan.
Okay.
All right. Some would liken it to the obelisk or the Tekken or the Tekkenu. You know, with that, you have there's several examples around the world that resemble that. But that's what that is. All right. Now, what's interesting about that, again, we'll get into that a little bit later. The Chinese structures or the masjids, I think what you call them, they're called, it was on the tip of my tongue, I can't remember what it is now. The ancient Chinese buildings, all right, there are few and far of them that actually have minarets. So we can say that one or two things, that the minarets were more of an Arabian, African-esque concept and is not needed, because they wanted, them as Chinese people in Asia wanted to preserve their culture. So those buildings that we see people jumping up and down on, Crouching Tiger, Hidden Dragon, those buildings were preserved. But they were also considered to be masjids. Look up, write this down, Chinese masjids. All right. We have to remember that the Portuguese and the Spanish were the Portuguese, the Spanish, and the Germans were integral parts of, in the beginning of the transatlantic slave trade. And when they were taking these people, when we see that the transatlantic was taken from off the coast, again, we make it seem like it's just this area. This is the coast. That's the only way they can go. But they were going into these South American and Middle American, Mesoamerican regions. All right. So a lot of people were saying if there wasn't a war between the German or the English and the Spanish, then we would have all been speaking Spanish. That's the rumor. That is why in some of the ancient Spanish, even over here, ancient Mexican and Spanish images that you see, you still have turbans. You still have things that are very Islamic or very Moorish. Brother, could you put your leg up for me? Gratitude. Those are the reasons why the majority of this area are considered to be Muslims. All right. You also have names. You have brothers that are named Umar or Omar. Brothers named Ishmael. All right. They have like Ishmael. I'm sorry. Ishmael Ibarra. You know, just interesting names like that, because you had the integration of those two cultures. All right. Then you have instruction 7. The Turks are the true descendants of Hagar, who are the chief protectors of the Islamic creed of Mecca, beginning from Muhammad I and the founding of the uniting of Islam by the command of the great universal God Allah. Again, that goes back to the first page for those who have your Moorish Holy Quran. You have this page right here, page 2. Should be the second page in your Moorish Holy Quran. All right. This is Sultan Abdul Aziz Ibn Saud. All right. He is, at that time of the Prophet, considered the descendant of Hagar, now the lead, or the head rather, of the holy city of Mecca. Why did the Prophet put this brother on the opposite side of the first page where you have him, the Prophet? All right. Now, we talked about this a while ago. Now, I'm actually going to touch on this, and then I'll move on to the next topic. So, the Turks, they claim to be the descendants of Hagar. During the time, why they rather get the recognition that they do is because they defeated Constantinople, which is now Istanbul. They were the rightful custodians of Al-Islam during the time where the Moorish Empire was beginning to fracture and fragment. They were the ones that held it down. I believe our Grand Sheik Rashid even mentioned that one time. It is said that there's a resentment for the Moors, if you will, because we couldn't hold the flanks. But at that same time, there was an argument there was a back and forth between the Turks and the Moors, because the Turks and the Moors shared separate ideologies pertaining to what Islam is supposed to be, or what Al-Islam is supposed to be. The Turks were one to preserve the Arabic ideology, while we, the Moors, wanted to preserve our ancestral and cultural identity along with Al-Islam. All right. But that is, when you look up Turks being descendants of Hagar, and it goes back through the silsila, or the chain, dating back to Abraham, etc., etc. All right. Now, do we have any questions?
I do.
Yes, ma'am.
So you beautifully shared with us about the Turks defeating Constantinople and being the descendants of Hagar. Give us the connection between him and the Prophet.
The Prophet Muhammad?
No, our Prophet.
Oh, right. I was going to go into that.
Okay.
Yeah. Now, outside of that question, do we have any other questions? Yes, sir.
Can you explain about the Twa? What do you know about the Twa?
As far as I I know about the Twa, what I know about the Twa personally, they were considered to be quote unquote pygmies. Imhotep was considered to be a Twa. They came from, again, the lower region of Africa. I want to say between Tanzania and Zambia. That is what I know of them thus far. You have the Twa pygmies. From the Twa pygmies, you go up to the Nubians, and then from the Nubians, you get the Egyptians. So that lineage and that line comes from. That is as much as I know. What we'll do is once we load the meeting, if the Grand Governor is here, he may have a little bit more information in regards to the Twa, but that's the basic information. The Egyptians regard the Twa as being the ground zero from where they come from, because again, when you look at where they come from, it's not north south, it's north south. And one of the brothers, Kareem, he made a very good point when we were talking about the map. You say you flip it upside down. We don't necessarily have to flip it upside down, because it's something about, again, it's something about this cradle to where the water runs differently. It runs differently. It runs a lot. The current doesn't run down here. It runs uphill. That's why it was considered northern Egypt, southern Egypt. So everything in the world runs the opposite direction except for this area. It's something about this area. What? I don't know. but definitely it was something else I honestly can't recall about the Twa. But that's the basic. When you look at the Twa, that's the beginning of that's where the Egyptians or the Khemites, that's where they trace their lineage.
They were also all over Ireland. And so, well, go ahead.
Go ahead. No, go ahead, sis.
No, if I'm wrong, tell me.
No, I don't want to say that. Go ahead.
Oh, so from what I've been taught,
right.
They were all over Ireland. And so where you see the leprechauns and you see on St. Patrick's Day, that's why it's so egregious for us to celebrate St. Patrick's Day when he's kicking out the black snakes. Those were actually him kicking out the Twa people. So that's what I've been taught, but I believe that there's
Islam. I'm not gonna say anything. I'm not gonna say I'm not gonna say anything.
So we should celebrate St. Patrick's Day.
Oh, we should definitely not say celebrate St. Patrick's Day. But if I say anything in regards to St. Patrick's Day, we're gonna get too off topic. But when we the part about the Twa, that I'm not entirely sure about. Because you also have teachings that say that they also have teachings that that refer to Buddha, the teachings of Buddha reaching that area as well, thus the founding of the Scottish Rite and the York Rite. So
the nappy-headed Buddha with the twist.
Right. So that's what I've heard relative to that.
But so then who were the leprechauns from that teaching?
The leprechauns were a 20th century construct from Europeans to celebrate St. Patrick's Day, because the original leprechauns weren't leprechauns.
Right, they were short little brown people that were running around. Well, I'm asking. What
they may have been from another pygmy tribe, not necessarily Twa.
Right. But I'm not confirming or denying that either. Not confirming or denying that either. But definitely the Twa is from the lower region of Africa, close to that Zulu and Zimbabwe area. That is what we have right now. If Haru is not able to answer it, I would definitely have a more in-depth answer about the Twa in connection to Egypt this coming Sunday school. All right? You had another question?
We're still waiting on the...
That's coming. You gotta have patience. Patience is a virtue. Patience is a virtue. Okay. Any other questions in regards to that? Yes, sir.
Oh, where's the land of Uz?
Right.
Could I
Yeah, go ahead.
See what you're showing? I don't want to see what you're showing.
Go ahead. Yeah, according to my teachings, I don't remember exactly where it is, but the land of Uz is in this area. Yeah, down in this area.
So that was spoken where Abraham was from, right?
Yes, but the Tigris Euphrates over here in this area by Iran.
Thank you.
The land of Uz or
Us.
You talking about
You said was over there.
Us.
He asked about us. He didn't ask about
U-Z.
I never heard of Uz before.
Oh,
Which one is UR?
Yeah,
is that over here?
Right, and one is UZ.
I never heard of Uz before.
That's what it said.
What
Abraham was
is
from the land
Yeah, Abraham
of
from
Us.
UR.
Was over here.
Was you are? Okay, I'm sorry.
Yeah, was over here where Abraham is from this region.
Okay.
Is that what you're referring? Were you referring to
Right.
Okay.
I thought it was Us.
Okay, not Uz. Yes, sir.
Okay, now,
Because we have the land of us.
Okay.
Yeah, that's what I thought.
in conjunction to what he was saying about
Mm-hmm.
that's what Abraham is from, right?
Yes.
Okay, my question to you is this. The Hindu religion is much older. I think it's one of the oldest religions in the world.
Right.
Well before Islam.
Right.
Okay. Now, my understanding is this. There were three major religions in Hindu.
Mm-hmm.
Vishnu, Brahma,
Mm-hmm.
and Shiva.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, now, the word Abraham comes from the word Ram.
Right. Mm-hmm.
So, in that region,
Mm-hmm.
people within that religion, they was called Ram.
Mm-hmm.
So, it's like you saying, I am a Muslim. They would say, you are a Ram, which came forward and said, Abraham.
Mm-hmm.
Now, I'm trying to confirm that. I can't find it
Right.
where it says exactly that.
Right.
But it seemed like everybody allude to that.
Right.
And they say Abraham is a group of people, a religion
Mm-hmm.
that says Abraham, which is Brahm.
Mm-hmm.
Now, I'm throwing it in your lap.
Gotcha. Y'all be mad at me.
You be blowing it all. But Uz is actually, since that did come up, Uz is actually where Job was from, where the story of Job come is. So that was Job. There is the land of Uz. That's where Job, the story
Okay,
of
how you
Job
spell
was
Uz?
taken. U-Z?
Oh, U-Z?
Yeah, so yeah, that was.
Okay, now where's that?
But Abraham is Ur.
I just have
Because it was
it wrong.
Ur
I'm
the
sorry.
Chaldees.
Uz is where? What is it in
It's
India?
it's mentioned in the Old Testament, and it's prominent. It hadn't been identified as an actual country because Job is a story of allegory.
Oh, really?
Yeah, Job is actually, across the board, everyone has said Job was an allegorical story. Excellent story, but there was actually not an actual Job. So even when you talk to the rabbis and everything, they don't argue with you about Uz. So that's why they can't find Uz, but Ur of the Chaldees we can find.
Right.
Right. Oh, okay.
So, the Grand Sheik Rashid Ibn, I'm putting this on him. But to answer the point, yes, there is a mention of Abraham being of India and name being Brahm or Abram. There is that, and then you also have Abram or Brahm in Sarai, which turns into Abraham and Sarah. So that is a narrative. Okay. Now, what to answer your question, sir, the connection is when they came up through this area and he got initiated again by Melchizedek, and that's when the name was changed to Abraham. All right. When according to the Quran and according to the Quran of Mecca and according to the Piscean text of the Holy Bible, that's where when he was questioning his father and asking, well, where is this Allah? Because his father had millions and quite a bit. I'm not gonna say millions, but he had quite a bit of idols. His father was an idol worshiper, so that's another sign to your point, because Hindus make idols every day. And as of right now, you have a Hindu brother that is worshiping Donald Trump right now.
Wow.
Don't believe me? Look it up.
Wow. Really?
Yeah. Wallahi. Yeah, you have Hindus make up idols every day. It's very interesting that we're asking these questions because they're going into my subject, which I haven't forgotten your question yet. But that's the connection. The connection is the narrative, as the narrative goes, Abraham came from India, being of the Hindu practice, and as he came up through here with his family, with Sarai and his father, say what?
His father Terah.
Terah, absolutely. His father Terah. When he came up to Ur, came up through Ur, came up through Ugarit, that's where he shifted his ideologies. And it went from being what some would call polytheist to monotheist. All right. My contention is that's a stretch. That's my contention. One reason is because during this time you had two regions. You had the region of Chaldea, all right, and then you also had the region, I can't remember the name, but you also had the region and a group of people in this area that practiced Zoroastrianism. All right, so we cannot account Zoroastrianism. We have to remember Zoroastrianism in this equation because that's where we get the concept of dualities. Because prior to that, the deities that we worship, they were just a part of nature. They were a part of life. There was no quote-unquote good or bad deities. That came about through Zoroastrianism. The Chaldean religion was a religion of divination and an idol worship. That's my assessment with Abraham being in that region of Ur, because that was in the area of Chaldea. Now, we're not to say that because of that time period that these regions weren't influenced by another. So that's another thing too. You know, just like there's a debate between Moors and brothers that practice the Kemetic ideology, which came first, Canaan or Mizraim. All right. Now you have some Moorish Americans that say that Canaan came first, and you have some Moorish, and you have those that say it doesn't matter, like myself, because regions and kingdoms they rise up simultaneously, and because you interact with each other, you're going to trade off on certain cultures. All right. If you doubt me, you will see that there's certain the same star, or there's the same crescent and sun emblem that's in Egypt. You will also see that in Canaan. You also see that in Moab. That's one of the things. If you look at the artwork, that's another thing too. That's another thing that we forget to remember when we talk about tracing our steps back. Look at the artwork. There's a similarity in artwork how the ancient rulers during the time of Kemet and the ancient times of Canaan, how they sit, how their gods, how the statues of their gods. All right. Canaan also has the deities with the foot, the deities and the kings with the left foot up front. All right. So there are similarities because you have the trading and intermingling of the different cultures by way of commerce and social issues as well. Canaan was also known as a cosmopolitan or a metropolitan area, just like America is today, just like like Mali, just like Morocco or Egypt or even Saudi Arabia during that time. Those were considered like the metropolitan areas, especially where there was a lot of commerce. It is said that going back to the Kaaba in Mecca, it's said to have over 1,000 deities or 1,000 idols that were in Mecca. All right, and that was by way of Zoroastrian, Chaldean, and Hindu idols that were there. And then you also have Eastern influences or Indian influences in Africa. All right. How many of us saw the Black Panther? All right. So if we notice, M'Baku said something that was very interesting when he challenged T'Challa. He said, "Glory to Hanuman." Hanuman is an ancient Hindu deity. It's an ancient ape or monkey deity. All right. You have during that time period, ancient time period, during the time the sister talked about the Indus Kush and the Kushite area, again, where there was an exchange of cultures by way of trade and commerce. So you have Eastern Africans that may have grown up, quote unquote, in poverty, becoming regents, becoming nobles, becoming rulers, and so on and so forth, and vice versa. So the exchange has definitely been apparent. But to answer your question, yes, there is a narrative that you have Brahman and Sarai coming through India into there. The change came, or the connection changed, when he got initiated by way of Melchizedek, and then he became Abraham. So it's Brahman, then you have Abram, and then you have Abraham. Does that answer your question? All right. Any other questions? Salam, brother. Pretty regal kufi you got on, brother.
Thanks.
All right, praise Allah. If we do not have any questions, we're going to go into the sister's question about the Prophet, Noble Drew Ali, in comparison with our brother Abdul Ibn Saud. All right. Pulling up some notes here, so please bear with me. I'm also going to read, for those who are waiting for me to find my spot, I want you all to, if you have Morris literature, turn to the article in your Morris literature where it's titled, or entitled, Religious Controversy. That should be on page 7 if you have your most recent Morris literature.
You know which article number it is?
We don't have the article number listed. It's under Religious Controversy. Yeah. Not in that book.
Say Morris literature?
Yes, Morris literature.
Page 7.
All right. Again, I want you all to take down these notes. This is important because this is specifically to our members in the Moorish Science Temple of America. And this is, but for those that are interested in becoming a member of this movement, I want you all to take heed to what's being said as well. All right. So again, Sultan Abdul Aziz Ibn Saud was the son, or one of the sons, of the Saud family. The Saud family, for those that are taking notes, write down Saud, S-A-U-D, Saud, as in Saudi Arabia. That's right, you guessed it. Ibn Saud, or the Saud family, is responsible for uniting what we know today as Saudi Arabia, that region. Okay? For the sake of time, I want you all to research the Saud family in Saudi Arabia. All right? He's responsible for uniting the East, or what would be considered the Middle East. That's why he's important. Islam in the East, rather. Okay? Absolutely.
Okay.
All right. Now, I want you all to take down 2 words, 2 terms. The first term is dromedary. Dromedary is spelled D-R-O-M-E-D-A-R-Y.
D-R-O-M-D.
D-R-O. Wait a minute. D-R-O-M-E-D-A-R-Y. All right. Then we have another word, Bactrian. B-A-C-T-R-I-A-N. Make sure I spelled that right. Did I spell it right? Got to. All right. Bactrian.
B-A-C-T-R-I-A-N?
Yes. Dromedary and Bactrian. All right. Those are in reference to camels. Those who are interested in the quote-unquote Masonic and the Masonic sciences, you notice that you have the dromedary, or you have the dromedary or the one-hump camel. In some of your Masonic and Shriner symbols. It is said in some of the research that the G, you know, the square and compass, the G represents Himmel. Himmel. Himmel, everybody say Himmel. Everybody say Gimel. All right? Those are one and the same. All right? Gimel and Himmel is where you get camel. All right? Y'all with me?
Yes.
All right. Now, I want y'all to take those 2 notes down. Dromedary represents the East. Bactrian represents the West. All right? If you notice in any of, I want you all to write down Moorish, the Moorish Guide. Moorish Guide. The Moorish Guide, you're going to see a symbol. You're going to see the Moorish Guide. You're going to see the ancient pyramids. And then you're also going to see a Bactrian camel facing the west. All right? Prophet Noble Drew Ali, as the sister said, represents the uniting of Islam from the west. All right. Say Islam when we've gotten to religious controversy. Okay. Now, I will be reading religious controversy. In this age, there is still much religious controversy as to the right thing. Big and powerful ministers have come to the conclusion that something is wrong. Some say it is the 10 Commandments. Others say there is a lack of sincerity in the purpose of the churches. Still others think that it is all worthless and not fit for the time it takes to attend them. Sound familiar? However, or whatever their final decision might be, it is certain they will make a change, or rather try to make one. The fact of the matter is that they have always had only a reflection of the truth and not the real thing. Like one who holds up to the sun a mirror and casts a few of its diverted rays in different directions. So have they done with the truth that is supposed to have come from the east. Did y'all hear that?
Yes.
All right. So not to speak radical or agitating against any organization, but the prophet is definitely recording and giving his critique on the churches of that time period. Because when we look at these religious institutions, the religious institutions themselves are supposed to be the heartbeat of the community. They are supposed to be the central focal point of where they come to meet, where they come to identify and work out their problems, etc., etc. I've said it once and I've said it again. Take a ride through North Druid Hills and you will see on every block there's a synagogue, there's a Jewish center. They make sure that their points of spirituality are central to their community. If there is an issue, they go to the synagogues or the Jewish centers and they work it out from there. All right? But they make it a point to have something at least on every other block. And they are a part and a partial to the thriving of the community. All right? That is what the prophet sees within the Moorish Science Temple of America. Allah told me to not burden y'all today because I was really going to talk about what a religious corporation was. It was on my heart. I really was going to come in with like this big book with a bunch of terms. I'm not but I definitely was going to talk about it. And the reason that is because we need to know. Right. Because we keep asking the question like, what is the Moorish Science Temple of America? What is the Moorish Science Temple of America? And again, we have to have a clear conception on the work that you're called to do. So you got to know what the institution is that you're dealing with. But yes, the Moorish Science Temple of America is a religious corporation. And just as you have the synagogues on every corner, the Moorish Science Temple of America was supposed to be on every corner in the Asiatic and Moorish community. That is without a shadow of a doubt. So our prophet right here is giving a critique on the narrative that he sees today. And he goes on by saying, there are but a few people who know what the truth is about man, and that a few know that it is foolish to try to impart it to the ignorant. Although the ignorant has finished college, he is a fool right on and being trained to jump through a hoop. Now, interestingly enough, he's referencing the concept of the talented tenth. That's what he's talking about. He's talking about the ones that receive this college education, and not the issue is not that they received the college education, is that they didn't go back to their communities. Because what they thought is that they would get this education and they were supposed to remove themselves from the very thing that made them and inspired them to be the person that they are today. That is the issue that we see amongst the Asiatic and so-called black communities. All right? So instead, you jump through the hoop and you make money for someone else instead of making money for yourself. Instead of perpetuating your own interest in the interest of your community and your family, etc., etc. The longer he stays in the school, the better he can jump. And the more he defends his jumping. That's called having a diploma on top of 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 degrees on top of degrees on top of degrees on top of degrees on top of degrees. I ain't forget about you, brother. I ain't forget about you. I ain't forget about you. But again, to this brother's credit, he brings it back to the community.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
From the east comes all the light. But though the sun is hanging at high noon, the blind cannot see. The same as the Islamic creed from the East was brought to the Asiatics of America by the Prophet Noble Drew Ali and offered to those who were sick at heart, tried for many years, yet they are blind and cannot see the light. Nor is the Prophet trying to put new wine in old skins, for he knows that it will burst them. Still, he has the only remedy for the nations. The remedy brought by Jesus, Muhammad, Confucius, and all of the other prophets, which remedy is the truth. So again, excuse me, one of the ideals of the sun hanging at high noon, one of the ideas, because that's an ancient teaching, is the concept of Allah and the sun, seeing the light. When he talks about the blind that cannot see, he's referring to the teachings that have been here but not been revealed to the Moorish Americans. I want you all who are taking notes to reference page 3, Know Thyself and Thy Father God Allah. You don't have to turn there. I'm just going to read this real quick. The industrious acts of the Muslims of the Northwest and Southwest Africa. These are the Moabites, Hamathites, Canaanites who were driven out of the land of Canaan by Joshua and received permission from the pharaohs of Egypt to settle in that portion of Egypt. In later years they formed themselves kingdoms. These kingdoms are called this day Morocco, Algiers, Tunis, Tripoli, etc. That's not what I wanted to read. I wanted to read the paragraph before that, above that. The lessons of this pamphlet are not for sale, but for the sake of humanity, as I the prophet and a servant is worthy of his hire, you can receive this pamphlet at expense. The reason these lessons have not been known is because the Muslims of India, Egypt, and Palestine had these secrets and kept them back from the outside world. When the time appointed by Allah, they loosened the keys and freed the secrets, and for the first time in ages, these secrets have been delivered into the hands of the Muslims of America. All authority and rights of publishing of this pamphlet of 1927. All right, we talk about cycle ages. All right, when one door closes, another one opens. All right, he's giving reference to that. All right, he's also giving reference to the keys in your Quran questions. All right, so we have history and documentations of Muslims being here, without a shadow of a doubt. Some of them even being of African descent. But how many of those Muslims said, no, we are going to teach Islamism to these Asiatics in America? You have there's one record, where is it? It's in India, it's somewhere in the Middle East. I want to say it's in the Midwest, of America. It's like one Turkish or Palestinian masjid that was like in the early 1900s. It's like one masjid, one mosque. That was it. There wasn't that many mosques because most of the Muslims or the Muslims during that period, they had to make salat in their basements, in their attics. This was new to them. This was, and during that time too, you have to remember that the Moors and the Native Americans, the Maroons, all of them were considered Negroes. Muslims as well. So all of them were lumped into Negro. All right? So the prophet is saying that these keys were given to him. That's why we have the history of the prophet, or the narrative of the prophet, rather going to Egypt and receiving these teachings. He went through the same halls as Jesus. He received that same blessing, that torch, that scepter was passed to him, just like the Moabites had received the scepter from the pharaohs of Egypt to pass through. Pass through here. I'm going to stop right there. Do we have any questions?
Well, that even parallels the initiation of Moses as well.
Yes, absolutely.
Okay.
Yes, absolutely. We have to remember too, in the Passean text, everybody went to Egypt. Mm-hmm. Everybody. Absolutely. Name one prophet that didn't go to Egypt. And why?
Because that's where the wisdom was.
Absolutely. That is exactly where the wisdom was. That was also where Hagar was from. Yes, ma'am.
Speaking of Jesus going to Egypt,
mm-hmm.
Of course it doesn't outline in the Bible who he went to see and study with and fellowship with during his time as a boy.
Right.
and I've not seen the Piscean text or anything. I'm going to look into that.
But you know where it is. It's right here. Talks to Matheno.
It's
in the Moorish
inside
Holy
of the book?
Yes, it is. It's inside.
I thought it was a very extensive, thick book because I've heard of it from going to House of Nubians when I was in New York. And I thought it was a thick textbook, but I never picked it up. So I mean, I didn't think it would be compiled within the Holy Quran, the Moorish Holy Quran.
The Moorish Science of America, yes, ma'am.
Okay, I'll check that out when I get home because I
Yes,
have
ma'am.
the copy at home. And so my question was the Essenes. The Essenes that were they were said to live in caves, and you know they were a group of mystics.
Right.
What do you know of them, and with regards to maybe perhaps the influence that they might have had on Yeshua?
Well, the Essenes and the Jesuits themselves was a derivative of the Essenes, and the Essenes, just like you said, were a group of mystics. Some would say, well, I'm not going to say that. I'm not going to say that. But they were a group of mystics. They were a secret order, similar to the Magi. That when you have, when a child exhibits a special gift or a special teaching, there's a special order that took them in. So part of that, you get that in the Moorish Holy Quran when it talks about, I don't want to get the names messed up, when he talks about addressing the Hierophants, the divine ministry of Jesus. Hold on one moment.
It's chapter 15.
It's not the one I was looking for.
Oh.
Okay. So one teacher that he had, just to answer your question, says you had Elihu, and then you also had Matheno. Okay, but specifically Elihu is relative to the Piscean text and the teachings, because Elihu was the one that taught Elizabeth and Mary in Egypt in the sacred groves. 13 is the one I'm referring to.
Chapter 13?
Chapter 13.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. Life and works of Jesus in Egypt amongst the Gentiles. Gentiles only mean non-Jewish. There's nothing scary about it. All right. And he talks about it. I'm gonna skim through it for those that are taking notes. Chapter 13. All right. This council of the brotherhood. All right. It's in reference to the to the Essenes. This council of the brotherhood convened, and Jesus stood before the Hierophant. He answered all the questions that were asked with clearness and power. The Hierophant exclaimed, Rabboni of the rabbinate. What does Rabboni mean?
Teacher.
Master. All right.
Master.
Alhamdulillahi Rabbil Alameen. All right. Why you come here? Why come you here? Your wisdom is the wisdom of the gods. Why seek for wisdom in the halls of men? Now this is one for those who understand that a wise man knows nothing.
Right.
Because we think that Jesus, because he was anointed, he was ordained, that he still didn't need to get cultivated and taught by masters on this plane to manifest. All right. So Jesus said, in every way of earth life, I would walk, and every hall of learning I will sit. The heights that any man has gained, these I will gain. What many man has suffered, I will meet, that I may know the griefs, the disappointments, and the sore temptations of my brother man, that I may know just how to succor those who in need. All right. So, again, the Essenes. I forgot what Essenes means, so bear with me. The Essenes. Essenes. Now I'm gonna have to remember it. I forgot it specifically what the Essenes mean, but
I can look it up if you
yeah, just write down Essenes and you'll be able to follow up with that. But it was in reference to something that they did.
Okay.
But they were the ones that Jesus went under when he went into Egypt, and he learned and he got lessons from. Because after that, he still had to go through one final trial, and that goes into chapter 15, where he had to sit with himself in the wilderness. And when we look at all of the prophets, they either go to the wilderness or they go to the mountaintop.
Okay, I'm sorry.
Go ahead, sis. What you about to say? Somebody looked up Yassine. Who is
Just to
Yassine?
answer your question, Yassine was a member of an ancient Jewish or Hebraic ascetic sect of the 2nd century before Christ and through 2nd century after the death of Christ in Palestine, who lived in highly organized groups and held property in common. That's awesome. They were communal. The Essenes are widely regarded as the authors of the Dead Sea Scrolls. And then also it says, as far as their belief, like the Pharisees, the Essenes meticulously observed the law of Moses, the Sabbath, and ritual purity.
Right. What I was looking for was the definition of Yassine.
The definitions, it's Aramaic, but it doesn't break down what it means root-wise.
For those who have it, look up etymology, etymonline.com. It's a lifesaver.
Okay, yes,
all right.
Thank you.
Member of the Jewish sect, just like you said, Latin from the Greek word is synoi. Now, to your point, sis, it does have a disputed etymology, but it says that it's perhaps in reference from the Hebrew Zinnim or Tzinim, the modest ones, or the Hebrew Hashaim, the silent ones. All right. So it relates to Hase or pious, or someone that is, or a group of men,
Like
or
a
a brotherhood that is
That's like a
pious.
silent brotherhood?
Yes.
Okay, okay.
Absolutely.
Allahu Akbar.
حي على الصلاة.
Allahu Akbar. Allahu Akbar.
حي على الصلاة.
Allahu Akbar.